Let me guess. You've been studying French, et puis t'écoutes une conversation et tu te dis mais qu'est-ce qui se passe, je comprends rien là, je suis perdue, j'ai l'impression que tout le monde parle super vite et c'est vraiment horrible, les Français parlent trop vite. And you're just convinced that everybody speaks super fast in French and everything is just one big word.
Je comprends pas.
Why do French people speak so fast? Hi, I'm Fanny, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm a French and English teacher online and I make videos where I give tips on how to understand French better, how to be more effective when studying a language. So I have a lot of students now and I've been teaching for years, and the one thing that I hear very often is French people speak so fast. I study, I know the grammar, I have some vocabulary, but whenever I hear a conversation, it's like, oh, it's super quick and super fast and I can't understand anything. So in this video, I'm going to try and explain why spoken French seems fast. All the little things that we do when we speak French as natives, the contractions, the connections, that makes it tricky to understand for non-native speakers. And I'm going to share tips on how to improve your understanding of spoken French. One disclaimer though, Francophones speak differently depending on where they come from, their age, generation they belong to, their social group, and so I'm going to talk about standardized spoken French, so the spoken French that you can hear on TV, for example, in series and movies, the one that everybody can understand. I'm not going to address any slang, filler words, little things that are proper to the spoken language, not written language. I'm going to address that in another video. So why does French sound fast? First of all, French is a syllable-timed language, meaning each syllable takes roughly the same time to be pronounced, and this creates a everything is connected effect, where words seem to flow seamlessly into one another. One common connection that spoken French does, and I'm going to detail right after this, is called liaison. That ensures smoother connections between some words for euphony. Euphony is harmonious sounds. That is why French is perceived as the language of romance and sounds beautiful to some people. Once again, as I said in the disclaimer, it's not always true. It really depends on who is speaking. Something else I'm going to mention later is that spoken French shortens some words to reduce effort. And on top of that, the French language has a lot of vocal sounds, more than English and German, for example, and some of those sounds are very similar, that are very difficult to differentiate for a German speaker, for example, like en, un, or e and e, also difficult for some English speakers, Italian speakers. The specificity of having a lot of vocal sounds requires that we open our mouths more. So with the flow of speech, we tend to not do that as much. And with the limited amount of consonant sounds, so p, t, that are very common in the German language and the English language, in French it's not as common. So if we don't open our mouths, which is what we do when we speak, we try to be as effective as possible, then the spoken language is not as clear, as enunciated, as articulated. Well, it's not that we don't articulate. A lot of people articulate, some don't, for sure. There are a lot of different people that speak in different ways, but it's mostly that we try to be effective and we try to be as flowy as possible when we speak, as I said, because of those connections that I'm going to detail later. And the spoken French tends to prioritize fluency and rhythm over distinct articulation.
And articulate!
And that can cause, for non-French speakers, a difficulty to really distinguish between the words. Because our brains are wired to recognize word boundaries, which are clearer in stress-timed languages like English and German, where stressed syllables, so syllables that are accentuated, dominate, and some syllables are shortened. And so in the French language, in spoken French, there are not a lot of stress syllables. We don't really stress anything, and that can make it harder for non-French speakers, especially English and German speakers, for example, to identify individual words. So what are some common contractions and connection in spoken French? So as I said, these contractions and connections make the language sound like a continuous stream of words. And stay with me, because after this section I'm going to give you practical tips that you can use to improve your understanding of the spoken language. Number one of the connections and contractions that spoken French does is to crop the pronouns. So the pronouns, like subject pronouns, for example, are je, tu, il, nous, vous, il, with an S. Those pronouns are never stressed. They tend to disappear a little bit. Instead of saying tu es, you are, we would say t'es. Tu es en forme aujourd'hui. No, we don't say that. T'es en forme aujourd'hui. Je suis will become je suis. But it's hard to say je together. So there's this phenomenon that happens that the j sounds will become sh. That makes it easier to pronounce with the s. So je suis fatigué, je suis fatigué. In a lot of little words like je, de, le, me, you know those 2-letter or 3-letter words with e, there is this neutralization, which means that the e sound tends to disappear. This e that is not necessary is called schwa. So when we speak, we tend to not pronounce this e just to make it more efficient and quicker. So instead of les cheveux du petit garçon, we could say les cheveux du petit garçon. And that's what we usually do. Petit, cheveux. Can you hear the difference between je veux, and cheveux, 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 cheveux? It's really subtle, right? But with the context, you're going to be able to know if I'm talking about I want or my hair. So learning to recognize those reductions will help your brain develop predictive coding, where it expects a certain pattern in a certain language. Number 2, still with me, merging common phrases. Those high frequency phrases that we say all the time, like qu'est-ce que or il y a, we tend to merge them all together because we already know they are like it's one unit. So if I say qu'est-ce que tu fais instead of qu'est-ce que tu fais, qu'est-ce que tu fais in the whole unit of the sentence, you're gonna understand I'm asking what are you doing. The expression il y a becomes ya. Il y a du soleil aujourd'hui. Il y a du soleil aujourd'hui. So qu'est-ce que, qu'est-ce. Il y a, ya. These are 2 examples.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
Those phrases are really processed by the brain as chunks, so lexical bundles. They go together and they mean one thing together. Imagine if we had to say all the time qu'est-ce que tu veux pour dîner? Instead we say qu'est-ce que tu veux pour dîner? Way quicker. Number 3, the elisions. So we drop a certain word, a certain part of a word. That's very common in spoken French. So if you've been studying French, you know that we have the double negation, ne pas, for example. Well, basically we don't use the first negation when we speak. So instead of saying je ne sais pas, I would say je sais pas. And because of the first contraction that I mentioned before, we would say, you guessed it, je sais pas. Instead of saying il n'y a pas de soleil aujourd'hui, I would say il y a pas. And because of the merged phrases, you guessed it, I would say y a pas de soleil aujourd'hui.
Je parle un peu français already.
And exposure to informal French really teaches your brain to process realistic speech rather than the textbook French. And finally, number 4, the liaisons that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So even if a native speaker doesn't use the other 3 things that I mentioned before, they would still, because it is most of the time mandatory, do the liaison. Those liaisons, those connections between some words with the last letter and first letter, they preserve the rhythm and the fluency. Everything flows together. Everything is like connected by one letter. Not everything, but almost everything. It really maintains the syllable time structure of the French language. So if you're familiar with those connections, for your brain, it's more expected to hear them, and so to differentiate between the words. One common connection is vous avez. The S in vous that you can't hear if I just say vous, you hear when I connect it with a word that starts with a vowel. It's a vocal sound, not a vowel necessarily, because if it starts with an H, you can also do the liaison. If I say vous avez, that's not correct. You would always hear vous avez. Excusez-moi, vous avez l'heure?
Pardon, vous avez un peu de feu?
Les enfants, so les, L-E-S, and the en sound of enfant, which is a vocal sound, they're connected. Les enfants. The S makes the Z sound. Les enfants.
Mes enfants! Je suis arrivé!
So these were 4 common contractions and connection in spoken French. If you are familiar with these, it's gonna make it way easier to understand spoken French. Now I'm going to give you tips to improve your understanding of that spoken language. Number 1, listen more actively. Use podcasts, YouTube videos, movies, the radio, everything you can, and try to alternate between slow French and real life speed French. Even if you're a beginner, because only listening to real speed French is gonna be discouraging and you're gonna be like, oh my god, this is impossible. Only listening to slow French is gonna train your brain to understand, only slow French, and when you're gonna hear native speakers speak together, you're gonna be like, well, that's not what I learned. This is not what I've been taught. So alternate between the two is also gonna make it easier when you go back to slow French because you've listened to real speed French. And when you go from, okay, so I get the structure, it's slow, I get it, I get how it's working, maybe try to speed it up a little bit and watch some actual real life content. You're going to enjoy it a lot more, also because usually the real speed content is more like interesting, I guess. Slow content is for learners and it can be a bit limited in terms of interest and in terms of excitement. Listen to all kind of spoken French, so interviews, speeches. That is a little bit easier because speech is a text, written French that is oralized, so you don't have all those filler words and parasites in the speech usually. Listen to vlogs, the radio, people speaking together at the same time. That can make it a little bit tricky to understand. Everything that you can, different sources, not always the same. Regular listening is going to improve your ability to predict the sounds, so phonemes, which are individual sounds of the language. And so you're going to train your brain to process foreign phonetics more efficiently. Second technique that is one of my favorites is called shadowing practice. So what is it? Basically, like a shadow, you're going to mimic, you're going to repeat what the person said. Either you do it instantly after they said it, or you pause, you repeat, or you just do it after. So let's say you're watching a series, you're watching a YouTube video, you're listening to a podcast, try to repeat out loud, not in your head, out loud, what you just heard. That technique helps your brain creating a connection between hearing and producing speech. That reinforces pronunciation patterns and rhythm. Tips number 3 out of 5. Elvis has joined us because he thinks this one would be very important to learn. I kind of mentioned it when I was talking about merged phrases, is to learn common phrases as chunks. Learn those words together because they're one unit of meaning. They don't really mean anything individually. If I say qu'est-ce que, it's not very interesting to understand literally what qu'est-ce que means.
Hey, qu'est-ce que ça?
So that is going to train you to not search for every single individual word, but bundles, like units of meaning. Tip number 4, I guess. Use subtitles and transcription wisely. I would encourage you to listen while you can read the subtitles, the transcript. So if you're listening to a podcast, there's this feature now where you can read the transcript of the podcast on Spotify. If you're watching a series or a movie on Netflix, you can use the French subtitles. And this, reading and listening at the same time, is going to help your brain associate the written word and how it's spoken. So you're going to be able to hear a liaison, and you're gonna see what words are connected on the screen. That helps a lot if your problem is you feel like everything is just one big word and everything is connected. You don't know how words are divided because of those liaisons. So seeing the sentence and hearing it being pronounced is really, really effective. And finally, tip number 5, practice listening in context. What I mean is listen to a podcast, watch a YouTube video about a topic that you already know and understand in your native language. For learning German, I like to listen to this podcast called Wissen Weekly. It talks about health topics and social topics that I already know about in a quite simple way, and I can grasp the words that I already know, and my brain really fills the gap when the speech is unclear because my brain relies on the context that I already am familiar with. You basically can predict what is going to be said in this video, in this podcast, and you can expect some words to appear that you already know and infer some meaning, even if some part of the speech are reduced and not clear. That helps also to use the body language when you're watching a series. If the character says, oh là, je comprends rien du tout, c'est vraiment trop difficile là, and you see that they're struggling, if you hear the word comprend, then okay, they don't understand. That you heard difficile, okay, they're finding this too difficult.
Et où est-ce que ça bloque en fait? Je comprends pas.
So these were 5 tips to help you improve your understanding of spoken French, and now we're going to practice a little bit. I'm going to say 3 sentences with the normal speed of the spoken language, and I encourage you to write them down in the comments if you can, and then I'm going to break them down and slow them down, and you can repeat both forms to really try to identify the difference between the written form and the spoken form. Alright, number 1. Elvis, ça dit de m'aider à préparer le repas? What did I just say? Elvis, ça dit de m'aider à préparer le repas? I said it the same way, a little bit slower, and now I'm gonna say it like if I had to write it. Elvis, ça te dit de m'aider à préparer le repas? No reaction from Alice. Elvis, ça te dit de m'aider à préparer le repas? Quickly and loud, normal again. Elvis, ça dit de m'aider à préparer le repas? All those little words with a E. Te, me, de. I just remove the E. Number 2. Qu'est-ce que tu veux pour le dessert? Qu'est-ce que tu veux pour le dessert? He doesn't know any of those words in French, so I don't have any reaction from him. Qu'est-ce que tu veux pour le dessert? We have a merged expression. Qu'est-ce que, qu'est-ce? And instead of saying le dessert, I just say le dessert. With the flow of the speech, it just works. When it's slower, it's hard to say le dessert, but when I just speak normally, it just flows. Qu'est-ce que tu veux pour le dessert? Numéro 3. Bah, t'es déjà là? Ouais, il y avait trop de monde en ville, du coup, je suis rentrée. This one is a little bit of a dialogue. The first person says, bah, the bar is just surprise in that context. T'es déjà là? Tu es déjà là? Ouais. Il y avait trop de monde en ville, du coup, je suis rentrée. Now, real speed. Bah, t'es déjà là? Ouais, il y avait trop de monde en ville, du coup, je suis rentrée. I'm gonna play a little extract, a little very short line from this series called Call My Agent, and I want you to write in the comments what you can hear, if you can identify what the guy says.
Bon, maintenant, je vais te montrer le département juridique.
Ok.
So in this exercise, I hope you repeat it after me, because repeating after native speakers, so using the shadowing technique, really engages something in your brain called the mirror neurons. They play a role in imitation and learning new motor pattern, like pronunciation. So basically you learn by observing and repeating what the person did. So that's it for this video. Please share in the comments what you find difficult about listening and understanding spoken French. Do you find it super easy? Do you struggle with it? And why do you think it's difficult for you? You can like this video if you enjoyed it, that really helps support my channel. Subscribe for more content around this topic of learning French and understanding spoken French, tips on learning a language, and you can share with a friend that's learning French. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye!